Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome those of you who are joining us here in person, and then also all of you who are joining us on the live stream. There's so many cameras to choose from, I'm not sure which one I should wave to, so why don't I just wave to all of them. And it's my privilege to welcome David Gungor here. My name is Noel Snyder, and I'm a program manager here at the Calvin Institute of Christian Worship. And later on in this place at 8 p.m. at the Calvin College Chapel, David Gungor and the Brilliance will be doing a concert. So it's our privilege now to just have a conversation with you in advance of that and get a sneak peek behind the scenes.
Yes, I'm very glad to be here and welcome. Thanks for coming. Love being back in Grand Rapids. I used to live in Grand Rapids. When I was 19, I met my wife. She was living in Tulsa. I was living in Grand Rapids, and somehow convinced her to marry me and come up to Grand Rapids. So our first year of marriage was in GR, and so it's a very special place to us.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do you ever go visit the old homestead?
I always drive by it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we used to live on Cherry Street, and we really love it. Yeah. It's such a great, it's a great city.
Nice. I'm going to resist the urge to start talking about Cherry Street restaurants and stuff right now, and we'll just we'll go on to the other things that I was planning on talking about with you here. So, actually, as we start our time together, let's begin with a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you for David, and we thank you for the gifts that you have given to him, and the ways that you have shaped him, and the ways that he has put the gifts that you have given him to use in bringing you glory and leading others to worship you. And so we pray that today, as we have this brief conversation, that you would speak to us as we share one to another. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So I wonder if we can just hear a little bit. You've told us the Grand Rapids connection. Now, why don't you just share a little bit more of how you got into this world of worship leading, music making, being a pastor?
Yeah. So I grew up a pastor's child. I lived in central Wisconsin, and at the church that we were at, it was a pretty Pentecostal, charismatic church. And the music in the church was actually really good. The musicians, music is a language, and I grew up playing sports, and I was not the musician of the family. My oldest brother, the second brother, who's also older than me, I'm the third of four, so 3 boys, 1 girl. But with my brothers, music was not something they just got to do. In fact, in the church, it wasn't competitive, but like my brother Michael is a great guitar player. He wasn't allowed to just play in the worship band. He actually had to really work really hard to be able to play with these adults who played music so well. And that kind of set a standard as far as in the house, music was this language. And in order to hang out with my brothers, so much of it was like learning jazz. And so my brother Michael played guitar, my brother Rob played piano. And so I got stuck with bass. And I'd ask my brother, I was 3 years younger than my brother Rob, and I'd be like, how do I get my bass to stop buzzing? And they'd be like, learn how to not suck. And I'd just be like, ah. So I'd sit and I'd listen to like old worship. My parents used to get like worship CDs all the time that you'd go and I'd try to listen to the bass lines. So I grew up listening to like Don Harris play bass, or listening to these different bass players. I'm not sure if you guys remember like Ron Canoli. I thought the bass line of Abel Boreal was just like so cool. And so I'd learn how to play bass and kind of slap bass. So I remember being like 15, 16, and I bought a 6-string Ibanez bass, which is like, it's not even a bass guitar. It's a mammoth of an instrument. And I would try to learn how to like slap and do that. And then I got into jazz band, play upright bass, learn how to read music. And at the same time that was happening musically, John, who I've been best friends with since I was a little kid, I pointed to a piano. John is not there. His presence.
He'll be there later tonight.
John is an amazing musician who he was leaps and beyond musically. He was doing amazing things, and I would want to, my friends that I loved, on one end, I had my sports friends, and on the other end, I had my musician friends who, music as this language, I had to kind of learn, okay, where's the right place to find a groove within this community? So I started writing songs, terrible songs, when I was in 9th grade. Just really sappy, emotional worship songs, and then really, really sappy, emotional love songs to like girls that I, wanted to like impress. And so started writing music at a young age, and then when I was in high school, started leading worship in I went to a private Christian school when I was a freshman, so played in the worship chapels, that type of thing. And then by the time I was a senior in high school, I was very jealous because my brother Michael was living here in Grand Rapids, and I noticed he had band members who were young playing with him. And I'm kind of a competitive person. I'm like, man, why are these guys traveling the world with my brother? I can totally outplay them. So I just sat in woodshed, just every bass line of trying to get better and better. And eventually I started playing with him and his band and touring. So when I was a senior in high school, every weekend we would go tour. I got an excuse to get out of school, got permission from my public school to go tour. And it was fun, but it was weird. We were playing a Choir of the Fire, which were these large youth rallies. So I'm playing I'm in imagine a 17-year-old going out on the road on a flight, coming back and be I just played for 10,000 people. Just a tool. I was such a tool. So then I ended up graduating high school early because I wanted to tour. And so did some college stuff through OU and ended up, while I was on tour, I was in Hawaii and met a girl, and her parents were like, you should help us, because I've always grown up in church, knew the church world. They were like, you should help us start a church. We're planning a church. And I was like, I can do music. Yeah, I'll come. So I told my parents I'm moving to California. And my parents were just like, what are you doing? Don't do this. But I left anyway. And I went to California. And while I was in California, I got a call that was like, hey, we heard you lead worship. We're looking for a worship leader for our youth. And that was a church in Grand Rapids called Resurrection Life Church. I had no idea what it was. And I'm like, sure, I've got a little college left. And they're like, that's fine, just come on. So I went there, and it was an interesting, great learning experience and time of doing that. And while I was there, I started really getting into youth ministry. And so I met my wife. We got married quick. We're the young evangelical kid that gets married way too young. And I was 19, she was 21. We got married, and 6 months into marriage, prego. We're like, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? The earth was caving in on us. It was becoming very flat. And so we decided, let's move back my family. Her parents she grew up, her parents are Methodist music ministers. Her dad teaches at a college music. He's a choral director. And so they live in Oklahoma City. My parents live in Tulsa. We went back to Tulsa, had a kid, and then just I don't know why this happens, but one kid became 4 kids, where somehow the next pregnancy, we were not trying, we had twins. And after we had twins, I'm like, I'm not gonna do music anymore, because I'd been touring with my brother. I'd done a lot of touring, been all over the world, and I thought, this is great, this is fun. But music is I've seen it with kids where a musician is always out on the road. And I just didn't want to have a family that didn't feel like I was home. I really value presence with my kids. And so I was a youth pastor for 4 years in Tulsa. And at the end of that, our church was going through a major shift, much more sacramental and much more liturgical in our imagination. And so as that was happening, I realized there's not a lot of music from my tradition in the charismatic world that actually celebrates things like the church calendar. Usually during Advent, we only sing Christmas songs. And so I decided I'd do a little side project, and I called up my buddy, John, who at the time was at the University of Texas. And I said, hey, I want to make a project that's based around string quartet. My wife is a violinist, and I said, I want to do this project. would you write this with me? So we got together, we wrote it, we did a record. I didn't want to call it David Gungor because he was such a big part of it, so we called it the Brilliance. And while that happened, it was kind of fun because we took that record and we did an EP. Right after we did some EPs, I started getting calls to lead worship at different things. And it was funny because I was not, I didn't want to be a worship leader, and I still don't want to be a worship leader. And so I thought, oh, okay, we'll do this. We started doing that, and we started getting like job offers and some tour offers. We go on tour, we do this. I brought my kids, like when I say I wanted to be with my kids, at the time we had 3 kids. We put, I think, 60,000 miles on our minivan in like 6 months and toured with our kids, So we'd play a show at like a club, and then I'd go to a hotel room and it's like 2 screaming babies, and my wife just played with us, and I was a youth pastor, so I had like, babysitters with me, and it was rock and roll in a whole different weird way. And so did that, it was fun. But while I was doing that, I got an offer to be an artist in residence at a church in Arizona that was a mega church, which I had already worked at a mega church, been there, done that, was not really into the mega church thing. Not that, it can be good for people, no hating, but I was just like, I liked the smaller community thing. And I also liked the more sacramental imagination, which is hard to do in a large context. And so I went out there, they offered an offer I couldn't refuse, in that I could tour, I could do this thing. I was going to do their Sunday nights. I'd lead some on Sunday mornings, but they really wanted to, in their minds, have a service that was much more liturgical. And so I got put in charge of this Sunday night thing, and I'd also be an artist in residence and write music and do that kind of thing. So I did that for about 2 years, and just, it was in Arizona, and it was like the desert of my soul. Because there was always this tension of like, do I want to be doing this? Is this my style? Am I just like a token liturgy guy? It doesn't feel very good. But we didn't want to just leave. During that time, the pastor had an affair, and it ended up being 8 affairs. And so they ended up having a whole scandal of the church, and we had to go through that church scandal, and it got laid off, and I'm like, I think I'm done being at a church because this is just bleh. And by that time, I was still under 30, and I had probably 6 bosses within the evangelical church have some type of moral failure. And I just was like, I'm done with this. This is not my cup of tea right now. What am I going to do? I don't know. But luckily, we had church communities. We had relationships. One was in Houston, one was in Tulsa, that just were like, hey, just be for a moment and try to forgive and heal and not get jaded and bitter. And so we just, for 6 months, didn't work. I would do Brilliance stuff, but I was like, I'm not going to work at church. What am I going to do? And Kate and I, when we lived in Grand Rapids, we had said we always wanted to go to Chicago, because in Grand Rapids, Chicago's like the big city. So we were like, we want to live in the city one day. But after 3 kids, it's like, I don't think we can do this. I would play shows in New York, and I just love New York. I feel so inspired by New York. And I had someone who had years earlier tried to recruit us to start a church with them. And we became friends. I didn't take the job with them. But while we're kind of discerning this, we go and visit them, and right when we find out, they're like, you guys need to move here. We're like, we just found out we're pregnant with number 4. We're like, oh my gosh, there's no way. They're like, you could live in a 2-bedroom apartment and have 4 kids. Now, I'm coming from like 4-bedroom house with 4 kids to move to a 2-bedroom, like 800 square foot apartment doesn't sound that fun. But we went, and we were just like, we're young enough to where this is the time to take a risk and to just do it. And so for the first time in my life, had to do a little fundraising to just move, because it was going to be so expensive. I had to move twice. And then I knew that, like, all right, just to break even, Brilliance has to make X amount of dollars a month, or else I'm not at even, I'm in the red. So it took some risk, but we did it. And it's been the best thing I've ever done in my life. I work at a church in New York that's small. It's like my dream type community, where it's small. It's a parish model church, which means it's a neighborhood church. I spend way too much money on rent. I hated that. because it's just like if you knew how much we spend on rent, you just like are like, you're just burning money. It's just monopoly money, and that's true. But the thing that happened is my wife, who's a violinist, if you are someone that's like, I want to be a serious musician, to be in a place like New York, there's just so much opportunity. So for things that she loves, she doesn't want to be touring all the time, doesn't want to be doing all the time, but somehow my wife is playing on like The Tonight Show. She played with Common, and she played again on The Tonight Show with Pete Townsend. And then she just played at Madison Square Garden with for this like Elton John tribute concert, and she played with Chris Martin from Coldplay. So she's like shredding, doing awesome. I'm like, you're doing so good. I'm so proud of you. While she's also doing her master's in spiritual direction, and also got fully certified from Suzuki because she was in New York School for Strings. So to see your wife like just rocking the world, you're like, yes. And then on my end, I'm just the bum that's hanging on with her. But we're a part of a church where I'm technically like an associate pastor. I help pastor the community, but what that looks like is I put together all of our Sunday liturgies. I'm also in seminary, and we together, we just are loving life. So we live in Chelsea. We're at General Seminary, and life is good. We feel nothing but gratitude and grateful to be in a community that we're in. So it's all good. That was a lot of bleh at you, but yeah, my name is David.
So,
Yeah.
Two thoughts. I was feeling cool because I get to talk to David Gungor today,
No.
but now hearing what your wife does.
Yeah, she's way cooler.
Yeah.
No, Kate is, she's at home with our 4 children, just rocking it out. Yeah.
But the other thought is you're kind of an open book now, is what it seems to me, and so. But I'll try not to exploit that with my. With my
if
next
you want to go
question.
open book, let's get
Yeah,
weird.
uh-huh.
I can go
No.
fully go there.
No, actually, what I want to hear about is just what would you say are some of the influences that have been formative in your way of thinking about the way you approach music, maybe even more broadly, music and the arts in worship? You're a worship leader. You also write your own music. What has been formative to you about how you approach that?
It's a wonderful question. What has been formative? I feel like trauma has been formative, and going through the trauma of evangelical, post-Christian, you deconstruct, you go through things, what captures your imagination. And I think for me, I would use certain language now that it'll seem a little bit odd, but on one end I could use the word like beauty, and I could tie that to the sacred feminine heart and say, I think for me, this is going to get in a little mystical zone, where I discovered when I was at my most disenchanted, I discovered the beauty of sacramental imagination. And in that place, and I'll tell you what I mean by that, I think it's really like a mystical experience that sometimes when I grew up, you maybe call it like a charismatic experience, but I wouldn't call it a charismatic experience for many reasons. I don't want to dive down that rabbit hole. But a place of going like, okay, I've experienced some wonder. And that's something that, for instance, you can go look this up. We're in college. Look up a Pew study about like all the different religions in America. And in the Pew study, there was an interesting number where you have all these different things where, growing churches and churches that don't have anybody there and why. But it was interesting, and out of all these different traditions, a number that just was like really close for everybody was, when was the last time you experienced wonder within the year? And it was like, for the last year of wonder, I think it was something around 46 or 44%. Everybody was the same. And you could say, well, why is that? Why are we not experiencing wonder anymore? Is it technology? Is it, we're just over it? But I'm not even talking from a church standpoint of wonder, but just much less like, I experience wonder. I think there's something in us that entertainment can maybe play a part of that. We've seen it all. Whatever you want to say. But for me, getting to a place of wonder started this other journey where I can look back, and in a moment of deconstruction, there were times in There were different authors that captured my attention from a theological lens when I was in college. But then while I was in like mega church world or working at a church and going through hell of certain areas of like, why am I doing this? Things would capture my imagination. So like one of those things was peacemaking. So I was in Israel and Palestine and learning about the conflict there. And while in Palestine, I'm playing music that's liturgical in front of a mostly Muslim audience. And often I would get, like if I played in America, and when we first started the Brilliance, people would come up to me and be like, I love that you're writing such great Catholic music. And I'd smile and say, I'm not Catholic, but thanks. Or they'd say, I love that you're writing such great Reformed music. Or I love that you're writing such great Spirit of God. Like they'd use all this charismatic language, and I'd be like, okay, thank you. But to them, there was something that spoke to their language. But what I liked about the early music from a church side of things was it kind of transcended, and this is a pretty cool thing about sacraments, is that it can transcend just your own little tribe. And so then all of a sudden I'm having this experience of wonder where it's not only transcending my small tribe or my bigger Christian tribe, but like humanity. You're like, wow, there's something. So I got really into peacemaking and into seeing people who come from totally different parts of the world who in the midst of struggle and pain are being. They're actually living a life that draws me to wonder. And so from those relational things, and a lot of that is traveling and meeting different people that inspire, it brought me to a place of going, what is the language that I use? And does that language often, even if I'm trying to bring people together, is the language itself hostile to people? So I'll give you an example. This is a little harsh. I don't mean for it to be harsh. But I'll use my own song. That's good. I won't pick on anyone. I wrote a song when I was a youth pastor called Our God Alone. And technically it's very like theologically orthodox. And yet the chorus says, our God alone, our God alone. Now I could give you a thing and be like, well, it's our God, humanity's God. But eventually there's this thing where it's like, our God is bigger, stronger, faster, the best. And it does this thing where if you don't have my theology, does it put us in this place to where we can't share this moment? And so I wanted to come up with language that was creative to try to say, like, I want to say same things. Like, I want to be about peace and beauty and goodness and mercy. But what I don't want to do is just have language that is so exclusive that it feels like you can't enjoy the music if you're not in my club. And that's a hard thing to do, and I'm still learning to do that. But there are a lot of different, we're getting back to like what inspires you right now. If I was going to be like, what is inspiring me? I'm really inspired by wonder. So there's a book called 7 Brief Lessons in Physics that is like this gorgeous book. The universe is poetry. It's just so wonderful about how they talk about science in a way that's so inspiring, because you'd think they're talking about quantum theory here, and yet when you read it, it reads like poetry, and you can understand it. And so I'm like, I want to have liturgical music or works in my own church that if you came in off the street, you feel drawn to it. You don't just go like, what is it? You feel drawn to that. Now that's I'm not saying I'm succeeding at that, but that's a telos, the end goal. Mm-hmm. So on one side I have that. On another side I have people like, what am I reading right now? It's like Zen and the Birds of Appetite by Thomas Merton. I'm very into, let me think of what else I read this last year. I read a lot of existential thought. I'm just going to be very honest. A lot of existential thought. So something like When Nietzsche Wept. It's a great book. And all of these things, they're all these signposts that are forming you. So right now I'm in that place of trying to be like, how can I have, when someone walks in, especially to our church gathering, we follow a liturgy that looks very much like an Episcopal liturgy or an Anglican liturgy as far as like the setup. However, everything that we do, there's a lot of creativity in it, and we actually empower the people within our church to write it. So for instance, the prayers of the people, every week is written by us. And every week, I'm going to intentionally not put any words on the screen that people are just like, I'm going to sing the words on the screen, but I'm going to have a refrain that I a lot of times will write that Saturday night that then is easy enough to where they can sing it. So it could be something like, Lord, in your mercy, hear our prayer. Sing it with me. Lord, in your mercy, hear our prayer. That's one. Okay? All right, we're going to sing this together. It has to be simple enough to where there's no lyrics on the screen and they can go with me. And yet, I have lots of moments like that so that I can introduce a lot of new music, and no one's ever like, why are you doing a new song? Because I've got a lot of hymns. I've got a lot of moments where they're singing the liturgy. The music always serves the greater story. It's not like, now it's time for music. Now it's time for this. In fact, our music, we probably play 45 minutes to, I would say in the service is an hour 15. We probably play 45 minutes worth of music. Now, not like we're singing worship songs all the time. No. Like we are supporting the liturgy. And so all throughout it might be through the creed or through whatever it is. I'm calling out different things, or I'm going to look at a cellist and be like, let's play a Bach piece here. Let's do this. Sometimes I'll have people sit down. So the point is, it's a very creative environment. It feels very artistic. However, it also is just like straight up like a Eucharist service, right? So I try to make sure that music is never like, now it's music's turn. Now it's the pastor's turn to preach. Our service very much is all shaped around the table.
Yeah. You talked about how wonder is shaping you and how that helps to build community. You didn't say that, but I'm hearing that in there, and then also how that fosters peacemaking and connection. And I'm struck by the way in which in your most recent album, you're able to put wonder into sound. And it strikes me that it takes some, there's no other way to say it. There's just practical wisdom, at work there in order to put those things into sound. So for my last question here, I wonder if you have any wisdom to share with, especially like our younger, up-and-coming musicians, worship leaders. What's a word of wisdom that you would leave them with?
Okay, so I'll first say to worship leaders, I think, now this is just personal philosophy of what I think about worship leading, is one, I don't like worship leader. I like you are pastoring. And when you are pastoring, you've got two hands that you're working with. On one side, you have the pastoral heart, which means you need to be really good about not being a rock star, but actually afterwards and beforehand and while during, like you are pastoring, you're loving well, you're present. You're not just here, but you're actually there. On the other end, as a worship pastor, you have the wonderful obligation to be prophetic. Now, I'm not talking about the prophetic that is like charismatic holy roller. I'm talking about seeing culture and speaking to culture through the arts. And so with that, you should be political. You should be, now you shouldn't be, I don't mean partisan politics. I mean like you should be speaking to, if you are a worship pastor, what is the kingdom of God ethic? Are you talking about those things? So you have artistic ways to say, if you see people suffering, how do you address that musically? And here's the deal. Music is this language, especially with beauty, is it softens someone to hear a message. Because if I get up and I preach the message, someone might go, oh, I hate that. But if they like a melody, they're going to hear the words different. So to do that, you can do things where you are speaking prophetically to certain things in society. So in the age of misogyny and Me Too, you should be addressing those things. I would not say addressing just from getting up and be like, all right, everybody, let's burn some people at the stake, or let's talk about how, no, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like, how do we talk about dignity? And how do we sing songs and have moments where the imagination is inspired to have a kingdom ethic? So when that deals with immigration, when that deals with, the immigrant, when that deals with race, Like we should be having moments where we're talking about what does race look like as far as in this aspect. Let's talk about things, but always with, and we kind of have a little motto for this, which is no idea is above scrutiny and no person is below dignity. So if that's my framework, I'm not going like, I have every answer. I am the Bible man that is now going to get up and sing another Bible song at you. No, I'm going to come with humility and go, here's a kingdom of God idea. But I'm always going to never demonize anyone in the room, knowing that there could be the most staunch Republican or the most hardcore Democrat or a communist or whoever it is. All are welcome. I'm not going to demonize anyone. But what I'm going to try to do is try to actually see the dignity in everyone and call everyone to a place of love and of a kingdom ethic. So that's one side. Really quick for musicians, if you're like, well, what's my advice to you? I'm going to go another dualist thing here, which is on one end, you are a craftsman, and on one side, you're an artist. On the craftsman side, that's the person that goes to the woodshed and works on their craft. If you are a singer, you are working on your scales. You are working on how to breathe. If you're a bass player, you're working on all the different things of playing with music with a drummer, holding it down, not trying to be a superstar, just doing bass fills all the time. What does the song need? Whatever it is, you're working on your craft. But on the other side of that, there are people who are so good, and yet they're not really good at their craft, but they're just artists. So a craftsman, if you said to a craftsman, show me something, they play it, and you're like, that wasn't that good. It really affects them. They're like, oh my gosh, you just hurt my soul. And artists, they put out their art and it's like fingernails that grow. So it's not really them, it just comes out of them. And if you don't like it, they're like, well, that's because you don't get it, right? There's just something about it where it's like, I don't care if you like it or not. That's the more artistic side of things. I think if you are a craftsman, you have to develop the other muscle that's kind of like get more risk, like put yourself out there more. Do things that's not just in your little woodshed. And yet if you're just a total artist, it's just like, I'm just, going to do whatever I want, flowing with whatever. Are you actually developing your craft? And so for all of us, I don't mean this bad. This is a massive generalization. So sometimes generalizations, they're not true, but they help teach us, right? So in classical world, usually what's emphasized more is your craft, right? Get in the woodshed and really do that. But it's things like playing music in the real world can sometimes be hard for that, because if it's not in the shed or the system, it can be like, am I just supposed to make up a part? Am I just supposed to? And I don't mean that bad. Some people are really good at improvising. But in that system, what's valued more is the craftsmanship. While in a lot of traditional like rock band sense, the craft isn't what's valued. What's valued is like, what part did you just make up, right? And so I feel like know where you're at as a musician and try to grow. So grow in your craft and also grow in your artistry, which means take risks and do things where you're actually, maybe you're like, hey, I've got a pretty good voice, I'm a pretty good guitar player. Are you songwriting? And craftsmanship and songwriting is a real thing. And get someone that can actually critique you. That's one thing where it's like, I grew up and my dad would be like, I'd be singing my heart out. My dad would say, that does not sound good. And he would always say to my brothers, we all three of us play music, and he'd be like, you don't have a good voice. And he wouldn't say, I mean, it sounds like really harsh. But he'd be like, no, don't do it, learn. And it made you be like, okay, I'm going to work on my craft of trying to learn how to sing in tune, or better, learn how to breathe. I didn't take vocal lessons until last year, because I always grew up and I'd be like, okay, I can sing, and I can do this, but I didn't really know what the proper thing was of like even vocal warm-ups, of even learning how to breathe properly. And so you're in your 30s and you're like, I need to get better at my craft, right? The same thing with songwriting. I don't know if you're writing songs or not, but you're probably going to start off writing songs that aren't that good. They might be inspiring to you, but I would just encourage you, get with people that can help sharpen you, if that makes sense. Be in a community in their church. I'm luckily a part of a community that is able to take a lot of risk. We're able to hit a lot of foul balls before we hit home runs, if that makes any sense.
Well, thank you so much for taking a little bit of your time to speak with us and have this conversation. And let's thank David for joining us.
Thank you.